Nietzsche's Zarathustra is a Catholic saint in disguise, an open letter to Pope Leo XIV. Most Holy Father, please accept my humble obeisances. In this letter, I will explain why I believe that Your Holiness is the perfect person to confirm the existence of a resurrection riddle that the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche hid in plain sight in his most famous book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, a book for all and none. The solution to that riddle, which is centered around the self-proclaimed last pope, inverts the anti-Christian surface of the book and wins the world's most famous atheist philosopher over to the side of the Catholic Church. In the prologue of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the main character Zarathustra heads down the mountain to preach to the public that God is dead and that the people of earth should therefore prepare for the birth of the Overman. At the very start of his descent, he meets an old saint and hermit who urges Zarathustra to stay up in the mountain like him, to laugh and cry and sing for God among the animals. Jumping to part 4, in a section entitled Retired after Zarathustra has returned to the mountain, the last pope tells him that he came up the mountain to find the last pious man, a saint and hermit, only to discover that, like God, the last saint too was now dead. However, the Pope adds, I did not find him when I found his cave, but there were 2 wolves inside, howling over his death, for all animals loved him. Why would Nietzsche include the forensic detail of the last Catholic Pope telling Zarathustra that the dead body of the last Christian saint was missing from his cave? The scene recalls the resurrection story of Jesus in the Gospel of St. John, 20:11-16. Mary Magdalene weeps when she sees that Jesus' body is missing from the sepulchre. Inside, she sees 2 angels in white. Then she sees Jesus standing outside the tomb. Mistaking him for a gardener, she asks him tearfully if he knows where the body is. Mary finally recognizes Jesus when he calls her by name. Returning to the hidden parallel in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the last pope goes on to say, O Zarathustra, with such disbelief you are more pious than you believe. Some God in you must have converted you to your godlessness. Why in the world would the last pope say that? I argue that Zarathustra is the last Catholic saint whom the last pope thought was dead, but missing from his cave. My theory that Zarathustra is the old hermit and saint from the prologue in disguise seems much less ridiculous considering what Zarathustra says in a section titled The Shadow. Well, he said, have not the most ridiculous things always happened among us old hermits and saints? At the bottom of this short version of the open letter to Your Holiness, I include a link to a 6-page version, which contains a link to a 60-page paper supporting these theories about Nietzsche in more detail. Before concluding, however, it is pertinent to note that Your Holiness's namesake, Pope Leo XIII, was in office while Nietzsche wrote Thus Spoke Zarathustra, as well as when he wrote his so-called madness letters in early January of 1889. In 2 of those letters, he requested an audience with Pope Leo XIII and signed his name as the Crucified. Considering that Your Holiness continues the legacy of Pope Leo XIII, it seems poetically appropriate that you should be the Pope who finally meets the humble servant of Christ behind the mask of the prophet of the Antichrist. In any case, without approving or disapproving of Nietzsche in any way, simply by confirming that there is a resurrection riddle centered around the last pope in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Your Holiness would flip that foundational script of the postmodern mind on its head and reveal the Catholic Church, and therefore Your Holiness, as the most natural leader to guide the world out of this ungodly age. I pray that this letter finds Your Holiness in good humor and that you will consider me, your humble servant, Timothy Owen Desmond.